I'm going to go ahead and get started, and people can drift in. I want to follow up from last Sunday. Was such a great attendance, so I thank you all who were here. And we had two folks from the state legislature who went over the state ballot measures. And I felt badly afterwards that I hadn't had anybody to talk about some of the city measures. I know we have people who live up from outside Denver, but there's a couple of complicated city measures. So I don't have the answers to all of those, but I did print out a good Denver Post story that went over the sidewalk initiative, which seems pretty complicated. So at the end, if you don't get it, the Denver Post, it was printed maybe 2 weeks ago. Come up and get a copy of that. So I am super excited to introduce Will Robinson from Braver Angels this morning. Far from his engineering and technical roots, he's going to be addressing a concern that many Americans have expressed, the polarization of the electorate. Like him, political polarization may have had you wrapped around the axle on a ride that you never asked for. Realizing that he was inadvertently contributing to the problem of polarization, either by emotionally reacting to statements made by the illusionary other side, or perhaps worse, doing nothing, he now has come to a far more healthy stance toward our neighbors similarly caught up in the demeaning rhetoric of our times. So please give a warm welcome to Will Robinson.
What are my chances? Today my stance is going to be apolitical, meaning I'm going to try to remain in every way, shape, and form neutral. However, in our electorate there are so many tripwires out there you can't move. Something may be very sensitive to you, and I may not even realize that it's an issue. Okay, so with Christian love and fellowship, please allow me to step over the line, your line, at times, and we'll go together. Plus, I'm somewhat traumatized. Not only does my back been hurting all week, but I went to the Broncos game the other night. I'm still reeling the effects of that. This morning's Denver Post. Elections, clerks, contested elections being discussed here, filling the staff with people who already know what they're going to do, I guess, and so forth is happening in our country. It's happening right around here. So we'll talk about that just a little bit, but it's really not the point of my discussion. You may have noticed that the country is polarized. And with that, I don't think we have a solution necessarily all in and of ourselves. So as a Christian, I'm going to call upon God to maybe guide our discussion today. So please bow your head and pray. Father in heaven, we are so grateful that you enter into our lives and that you love to guide and direct us as we call upon you. Father, work in our hearts, work in our minds today as to what we can do, what we should do, what we might do, Father, to better serve the neighbors that we're told to love around us. Guide and direct us, Father. In your name, amen. Thank you. Being an engineer, I'm a terrible salesman. And that's okay. I don't try to curry favor with most people. I just tell it like it is. We have a problem of polarization, as you know. And I played, and maybe you have played, and probably you have played an unintentional role to contribute toward the polarization. Me, I've done nothing, you say. Well, maybe you have and don't realize it. If you think that this is the acid test, if you think that the other side from which you are standing, the other side, you know who they are, right? You can describe them, you can look at them. If the other side, you can see their holes and the fractures in their logic and in their thinking better than you can see the same holes and logic in your thinking, then you're probably polarized. Okay, there's a sense in which you have formed opinions and you may be contributing because you're not necessarily going to engage with your neighbor because of this. You might share. But the rhetoric is caustic. It started bothering me in the mid-teens as I was coming through this, and certainly in 2016, it ratcheted up. It's caustic, demeaning, demoralizing, damning. Terms like libetard, okay? Maggot. Okay, those are kind of terms that have been used. But you come to realize the more you dig into this world, that it's only about 16% or about 1/6 of the electorate that's caught up in this, 6% from one side and 10% from the other. They're really caught up in defining and drawing lines in the sand. And so with that, I want to go through who the electorate is just a little bit, and what we feel and what we maybe can do about it. These types of discussions that we're having today, or the type of rhetoric that we're hearing everywhere, used to be concentrated to that maybe 6-week period before an election. Boy, now we get to enjoy it all the time, okay? It's out there all the time. I mean, I just have to turn to the Post and there'll be 10 reasons why it's still alive and well. Now it's a daily point of discussion. And then it creates actions. It's not just passive, it's not just people talking. Actions like Charlottesville, Kenosha, January 6th. We are a representative form of government. And when we begin to erode the elections and say they're not valid because I don't like the result, or one thing or another, more importantly than the Charlottesville, the Kenosha, and the January 6th, is the fact that we're beginning to erode our republic. And that's the concern, and that weighs on me far heavier than a lot of other things. My concerns have morphed. I was sitting in the seats 2 years ago, bothered immensely by the rhetoric and the causticness of our elected officials and so forth, and it was going out in the streets. You saw those events happening, and I decided to do something. So a little over a year ago, I decided I was going to go out and start maybe setting people straight. They needed a solution, and the solution was pretty obvious to me. If everybody just agreed with me, we wouldn't have a problem. Actually, we would have a problem, a big problem. And the problem isn't that I have such erroneous thoughts or have a capacity to do ill. It's that America has always been strong because, excuse me, I'm going to use you as the right side and the left side, at least from my view. They have always got together in the middle and tried to figure things out. I was just mentioning to Mary Jo that I've been reading a book that's called The Tipper and the Gipper. And it's Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan working behind the scenes as friends to try to resolve a lot of the issues that were occurring in the 80s. Well, it took me about a couple months I was simply going to go out, maybe go to the corners and try to rally support for my position. But what was the solution? The problem is not that you have one view and you have another. It's that it's create polarization between us. That's the problem. That's what we need a solution to. And so with that said, I joined an organization, I didn't know it existed before this, called Braver Angels. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. The Braver Angels at that point was over 10,000 adults who were band together to try to depolarize our society. And it's far larger right now, using the life skills that they have to do it. With that said, I joined it, and I have enjoyed the benefit of that. Now, I want to pass a concept that I think is essentially important, and you'll see it played out every day. I have an idea. I think the carpet should be red. Okay? And you might say, oh, I love the blue. And we can get together, and maybe because of the cost of the carpet, I'll give up my role, my thoughts, and so forth. And we can get along. We can work it out. You likely, as a church, have issues that get created, and your council has to resolve those issues, and I get that. But I want to get into a very controversial subject. Who makes the best barbecue? And I want you to shout this out because I want to be down here to hear it. Just yell it out. Which state has the best barbecue?
Texas.
Kansas City? Oh, that's Missouri then. Yes?
Tennessee.
Tennessee, okay. Who else? Texas. I knew that was going to come up. Somebody thinks Texas has the best barbecue. But what about you? What do you think who has the best barbecue? Virginia. Virginia has the best barbecue. Nobody's named my favorite yet. Who? Well, the neighbor state there, North Carolina. Okay, I'll join you on that. You like Kansas City, and actually I think Kansas City's right up on top. And if I may, your name? Terry. Terry. Now, Terry thinks...
Both sides, yeah.
Gotcha, okay. A politician in our midst. So we've got Kansas City barbecue, and you would defend that, wouldn't you? Absolutely. Absolutely, and you'll look for people to join you in your caucus on Kansas City barbecue, won't you? Yes. Okay. And who also thinks Kansas City barbecue? Please put up your hands. Hey, you have a busload. Okay, small bus, really small bus, but yes, you have a busload. And do you know that these folks are going to hear your passion around Kansas City barbecue? And most of them are going to ignore you. Now, that's not going to make you feel very good. No, it won't. And so when you're not feeling very good, you'll simply
Go get barbecue.
you'll puff out your chest and say, no, Kansas City is the best barbecue. Now, what we've done, and you'll protect that, won't you? You'll protect that view. And everybody else who doesn't believe that, they just don't get it, do they? Yeah, see, that's the problem. You all are clueless about really good barbecue. So, we can go from an idea, who has the best barbecue? You think one thing, somebody else another. An idea is a solution to a question or a problem. And we contribute ideas, and when Tip and the Gipper got together, they kind of met in the middle and tried to figure it all out. Today, what's happening is something very different. And I really want you to pay attention to this when you see the media. It has gone from idea to ideal. Idea to ideal. And the ideal part of this is when you say this is your ideal, best barbecue ever, you set a standard. And that's really important. And then all of a sudden, somebody comes along and challenges your standard, not just your idea. What you set that's the best barbecue. You're going to go around preaching that and try to get more people, and there's going to be other people going elsewhere, and you're going to get upset because they're patronizing other states or other kinds of barbecue, and it's just not working. And eventually, I mean, not you, Terry, would say this, but I might say, oh, there are a bunch of idiots out there who don't like, start calling them names. And by the way, Terry, don't let anybody know, but you're a little insecure because you see this huge host of people out here not joining you in your barbecue. So in your insecurity, you even puff out a little bigger, don't you? And you want to fight a little more. And I'll tell you what, in a microcosm, that's not far off what we're dealing with. We've gone from how to fix immigration. If I say it's open borders, or if I say a wall, that doesn't leave a lot for communication at that point. You set the line in the sand, and that's your ideal. And when people challenge your ideals, you get angry, you get caustic, you begin to demean them. Thank you, Terry, for letting me use you. I'll go out to barbecue with you at some point. I love Kansas City barbecue. How do we create a healthy landscape within us? I am a Christian.
I believe that we have some ideals in Christianity. The one that we all know, that you love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and muscle and intelligence, and that you love your neighbor as well as you do yourself. That's the Message version, and I think it's pretty neat. But there's also the language that we use is pretty important. And I go to Terry into saying everybody was an idiot who didn't believe what he believed. But Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, you're familiar with the command to the ancients, do not murder. I'm telling you that anyone who is as much angry with a brother or sister is guilty of murder. Calling a brother an idiot, you just might find yourself hauled to the courts. Thoughtlessly yell stupid at a sister and you are likely on the brink of hellfire. The simple moral fact is that words kill. And then there's people in our government who we might defame. Be a good citizen. Paul says in Romans 13, all governments are under God. Insofar as there is peace and order, it's God's order. So live responsibly as a citizen. And finally, one I can get my arm around. In fact, this has been a guiding post for me as I understand my role in all of the polarization that's going on. One of the last Beatitudes, you're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. Blessed are the peacemakers. In other words, that's when you discover that who you really are in your place in God's family, for they shall become the children of God. With that said, we had Simon the Zealot. Now, I've been to Israel several times, had the privilege of being there, and learned quite a bit. Simon the Zealot. Does anybody know what a zealot was? Okay. They had a little pouch in their cloak. It's where they carried their knife. And if they saw a single Roman soldier, they would walk up behind them. They were very much the right-wing group in Jesus' day. And it's interesting to me because Jesus accepted them. He accepted Simon. And I think that says a lot. Somebody that was polar opposite, if you will, of maybe what Jesus would have done. He certainly didn't take actions like that. And yet he was welcomed into Jesus' presence. I take solace in that. I take pride. Now, let's look at the sides and the various places that you can be. There's your core emotions. There's a view of the other side, and there's key phrases. And you can decide, probably based on an issue, where you are on this. All the way from here, they are our enemies. There's hatred. They want to harm our country. Okay? You see them as kind of scum of the earth. And you may remember, I think it was Hillary Clinton who said the deplorables, right? There's disdain for those. There's ignorance out there, and they should know better, right? Finally, you soften your stance a little bit, and you simply have pity for them. And they're well-meaning, but they've been duped one way or the other. And then finally, you might get to a basic respect for people on the other side, and that's a good place to be. They're pretty good, but they're flawed. But they're pretty good compared to everything else. They have something to contribute. And then finally, you get to the point where, hey, they're just like me. Let's talk it through. They have something to contribute. I have something to contribute. And I think we can appreciate the stance each of us are taking. Now, I have been in every one of these categories, and least in this last one, respect and appreciation, because that takes a lot of time. You got to develop a relationship and then to continue to foster that relationship. But I've been in every one of these. And I've used some of the language that Jesus condemned in the Sermon on the Mount. So how do we bridge the gap? First thing we do in Braver Angels is we call it depolarizing from within. It's taking from where you are at and saying, hey, I have trigger points. if I begin to react emotionally against any of this, let me make it very clear. You have trigger points. There's something that's been challenged in your values, in your ideals, something that's been challenged, and you need to dig down and find out what that is. And some of your ideals may actually puff and smoke a little bit. They'll simply go away and realize they are ideas. It's not worth fighting for. Other people have ideas that could complement and make those even better. The one-dimensional ideas that I have need a community of people to make them happen. And you begin to diffuse, as you depolarize from within, you begin to diffuse the minefield that's around you, that you're dealing with. We call it getting out of your bubble. Now here's some bubbles. I hope you can read this. This is by the Pew Trust. They looked at all the media outlets. And the question was, well, on a given question, are they tending to lean a little left, a little right, a lot of left, a lot of right? And they rated them. So the ones in the center, they couldn't predict on any given subject matter where they would go. And so they put them in the center, where they probably belong. They didn't say they were the best media outlets. They simply said they tended to be pretty neutral in their positioning. So find your media outlet of choice. I think on the far side, you have Fox News, and on the blue side, you have CNN, and I think at MSNBC. So you have some major new and that's your bubble. That's where you're getting your information. That's who's framing, those folks are framing up your view of the other side. My favorite, which I use quite a bit, is NPR. And yet they're a little bit left. I want to get out of my bubble. Maybe I stop listening to them as often as I do. Where's your neighbor coming from? You know, the person on the other side. It all depends. Many of them are products of disenfranchisement. If you're not white and you're not Anglo, you'll understand that there might be some disenfranchisement that has gone on in your history, in your family's history, in your, I call it race maybe, that has caused you to be affected one way or the other, have very strong feelings. And I can fully appreciate that from the standpoint of you feeling bad about it and angry maybe. Then there's historical cultural positions. And I'm no anthropologist, so please don't mistake me for having much to say about this, other than I've lived all over the US. And I realized that in some parts of the country, people were still kind of fighting the Civil War. And for the South, the Civil War was make the government small. It shouldn't be in my issues. That's a state's issue. So in the North, when the Civil War was about to break out, everybody in the papers was clearly focused on the fact of slavery. If you go to the South, you would hardly hear about slavery in their news. It was all about states' rights. And that continued after the Civil War. What social network are you in? Oh my goodness, now we have that to layer on top of everything else persuading us. I have a group of guys that I bicycle with, and we're kind of the same ilk, and we'll stop for a water break, and inevitably something about one party or the other comes up, and that's my mini bubble. That's where it's an echo chamber. I say things and I feel better about their perspectives. They validate me. So that's why I'm saying get out of your bubble. Getting out of your bubble is one of the most important first steps that you can take. Then it should lead all of this internal look that you have, it should lead to humility. That you don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I'm certainly there myself. So bridging the gap, who is my neighbor? Let's say you get depolarized from within, and you really understand your trigger points, why they're there, and you vow not to let them guide your thinking. So where do you go first? Go to your bubble. Go to your bubble. And start talking about all the bubble issues. Immigration, gun control, abortion, dreamers, law and order, God's country, voting rights. Go to your bubble and begin to share with them a wider view, what the other side might have to offer, how they're valid in some of their insights. Begin to depolarize your bubble. That's the first thing you can do, and it's not very threatening. They may call you names. I know some of the Republicans who are on the far right. If you're not far right enough, they'll call you a rhino Republican in name only. But they'll disenfranchise themselves from you. But most of the time, people within your bubble side will stick with you on where you're at. So who's my neighbor? This is from a Pew Trust study. It's 168 pages long, so I don't know that you want to go home and grapple it this afternoon. Although I'm not interested in football anymore, by the way. We have on the far top right the hardline Republicans, or red, and they're called by the Pew folks faith and flag conservatives, 10% of the populace. This, as well as the group on the other side, the progressive left, that is as dark blue as you can make it, they don't compromise much. Surprise? They just don't know the word compromise. The faith and flags, if you saw an article, a very long article on Lauren Boebert 2 weeks ago out of the Denver Post, it talked about her being a Christian nationalist. Okay, if you saw that article. At any rate, there's a lot of Christian nationalists in that group, as well as flag adherents. Committed conservatives, that's an interesting group, and this is interesting bedfellows, if you will, together, but that's the way the electorate is made up. They're made up of very conservative Christians who are largely economic in their forecast, or in their view, okay, and you might fall into that. The populist right are the libertarians who say, smaller government no matter what, get out of my house and stop imposing yourself on me. And the ambivalent right is very similar to the outsider left on the other side. They can swing either direction with issues that are out there. The ambivalent right don't particularly like Donald Trump, as was found out. And then the outside left actually don't particularly like Joe Biden, but that group dislikes Trump vehemently, so they tend to be a solid voting bloc, if you will, for at least in presidential elections. Stressed sideliners, I find that an interesting group. They tend to be very poor. I can envision them having 2 or 3 jobs, just trying to keep their nose above water, and they really don't have time for the electorate. And I'm sure the parties are reaching out to them or trying to, but they really just don't have time or interest in following the electorate. Mainstay Democrats, they're just solid. They've always been a Democrat, they always will be. Establishment liberals, this tends to be a very, very affluent group. And they tend to impose, you can imagine the Hollywood actor type thing, but they're establishment liberals. They will continue to turn the notch. This faith and flag conservatives, they want things just as they are. And then the progressive lefts want to blow up everything in sight and then reform it, rephrase it. Was there a hand up? No? Okay, sorry. So who's my neighbor? It's complicated. But I don't feel any hesitancy about talking with almost every one of those pieces of pie, although the deep red and the deep blue might be a little hard to have much discussion with. But nonetheless, we're talking about 85% of the electorate isn't wrapped around the axle. In talking with the folks that are below the intense colors, they're angry because the media only picks up on the deep red and the deep blue. And that forms your opinion of them. And in fact, if you talk to somebody, I've talked to some people that I would call committed conservatives, they can't stand the fact that the media is defining them, because that's not who they are, okay? And you have to look at it on both sides. The media plays to where they'll get their ratings. And the ratings tend to be at those places where you can create controversy. That creates interest. So what do we do with people who are having other views? We start by respecting them. If I come to you and we have different views, oh my goodness, Terry, we have to talk about this thing that you have. So we sit down and talk, and I let you tell me all about what you think on immigration, good, bad, or ugly. But I listen. I don't even interrupt. I listen to you. And I might even try to tell you what I think I heard, and for you to agree with me. And the fact that I've listened intently enough to be able to repeat it back to you and to understand where you're coming from. I may not agree with you, understand, but I understand where you're coming from. And I want to, by the way, I want to point out a few things where we really do agree. That conversation starts there, and at the end I say, Terry, I have a slightly different view. Can I share with you? And who is not going to let somebody do that? Okay? Unless they're afraid of my view or they can't even articulate their own view. But other than that, that respect and listening and understanding, maybe playing back and asking for the permission. I've seen this happen in workshops that we put on at Braver Angels. And by the end of the day, this red and this blue are best friends. They really found commonality in their differences. And that's the truth. There's more in common than not. So, a lot of people have laid down their life for this country over the years, and I'm humbled by that. I asked myself the question, what about you, Robinson? What are you going to do? And so I decided to do something. I wasn't sure what. Does anybody know C.S. Lewis? Okay, you know the name? Or the author. C.S. Lewis had a very good friend named G.K. Chesterton. And I love this quote. And G.K. said, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. And I love that because the kid's running out in front of the car. Do I run out and grab him, or do I go to the gym so I can get buff enough to be able to do it with elegance? The question is, you just jump out and do what you can do. Right now, I'm doing what I can do. I'm talking to folks today, last Tuesday, next Monday, and so forth. I'm trying to get the word out that we need to work on depolarization. Who are you going to send in your place? We got a republic that is being challenged right now, and I don't think I'm being melodramatic about that. If not, you can join a group and start to listen to some of their neutral moorings. Every place in the organization, in Braver Angels, every position of any authority at all has a red and a blue candidate in that position. Down through the organization, all the way down to the local level here in Denver. We have something called the Denver Alliance, which is just a geographically tight-knit group. And we have a red and blue person who lead that as well. Here's the website. See, Braver Angels is out to change your heart toward one another, not to change your mind about issues. We think they will sort themselves out once you depolarize from your fellow American. So with that as an introduction to depolarization, there might be a question or two out there, I think. Yes, sir.
Pete, I'm going to bring you a microphone.
Thank you for the great talk, and you really laid out the issues really beautifully.
Good.
I wonder if I could add one more thing to your mission, and that is not just based on how people in the electorate think of each other, how we think of each other, but put the responsibility back on our leaders. And I chiefly think of the negative campaign ads on television. which are so incredibly toxic
Yes.
and leave such residual with us that endures long after elections. And the residue is this: there's no leader who can be trusted. They are all radicals and extremists. And I wonder if there isn't a way that we can say it's not just our hearts that need to be changed, but to say this, that the people who can best change our hearts are our leaders themselves. And is there a way that we, regular people, could go to them and say, stop it. You're wrecking us. You're really destroying us. First thing is to stop it. And then the second thing is to say, find an imaginative way that's creative and good, in a way that could really help us see our leaders better. I would love for my grandkids to think, I'm going to grow up and be president. They're not thinking that right now. They're thinking they're all scum and it has to end. Can you help us? Can you help us find a way to lead our leaders?
We have within Braver Angels, we're trying to be sensitive. We have a number of workshops that we put on. One workshop is Braver Families, families that are split apart. Thanksgiving dinner, if I may use that as an idea, where you're split apart from even between spouses, even between brothers and sisters. But one of the other things we're involved in is called Braver Politics. It really speaks somewhat directly to your thoughts. And that is, we get staff, we get actually politicians in different states right now. That's how we're working, to get them to come to a workshop on depolarization. And it's pretty effective once we do that. I've noticed in answer, or at least another perspective is, you don't tend to hear, you hear a handful of senators, a handful of representatives always talking. Who you're not hearing from are probably the people that can bridge the gap. And it seems to be a pretty good ratio of maybe 5-to-1 or thereabouts. Now they're all going to, when cornered with a microphone, they're going to kind of announce the party line, but a lot of those folks know of better days, and they hope to get back there soon. And so, with that said, I think we can have an impact, but it's going to be one person at a time. I mean, the media has a big horn, and we have to work one time at a time to eventually get to the point where no one wants to listen to the media anymore. It's interesting to me. Does anybody remember Willie Horton, the revolving? Okay. It seems to me, and again, I'm no anthropologist, but it seems that there was a shift that we went to cliches, because Willie Horton was an image, a visual image with a few words that separated Michael Dukakis and George Bush, okay, back then. It's unfair that we put ourselves down to the level of cliches. I hate them myself. And yet that's what our media is, and these elections are built on. I mean, just go to any of the election ads that are out there. They're all cliches. I mean, the whole thing is just sound bites that sound really good in the context of nothing else. Okay, they're not fair, but we eat those as a culture, and that's too bad. So let's go and start to push some of those cliches apart and maybe make more sense of it. Both sides are doing it. Okay, if you think you're on the side of right, maybe you're not. Maybe you're not. Both sides are guilty of this. Yes, other questions? Yes?
I just have a quick statement, because I'm a supporter of Braver Angels, although I haven't been that involved, but I watch a lot is on video, a lot is on YouTube you can access. You can become a subscriber on YouTube. But didn't they have about a year ago a presentation to Congress, or there was something?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's probably even accessible.
Yeah, one of the leaders, the co-founders of the Braver Angels, is a professor at the University of Minnesota, and he went before Congress to talk about this. Now, you know, what the effect was, I can't tell you. It's before my time, but my guess is it's got some air. Other media outlets are picking it up, but selectively, I'm sure.
So there's lots available online.
Oh, there really is. If you want to learn how to depolarize, you can sit in, if you will, and just go along with a workshop that's going on depolarizing within. And within three hours, you might see some real changes in your thinking. And that's a worthwhile 3 hours. Others?
I'm wondering, do you find that is there more responsiveness to your workshops from one side or the other?
Okay, this.
I was in Grand Junction recently, and some of my friends there have started a local group called Restoring the Balance, kind of similar. I'm going to let them know about this.
Sure.
And I happen to have a family member who is in one of the extreme categories, and when I suggested he might want to go to one of the workshops, he said, we're not the ones that are in the extremes. So until they change, I don't have any interest.
Amen.
Yeah. So I just wondered, yeah.
Yeah, it's no secret. We have harder times attracting red-leaning folks to these discussions. There's a distrust of the other side that I think is undergirding that, and until some people go, and there have been, numerous people have gone, until we get that happening and them talking to their own bubble, and that's the way this is going to come around. When somebody in your own bubble begins to, challenge, you trust them, and then maybe you see things differently, a little more even. Yeah, it's a tough thing. It's your bias, and you're playing with your bias, and that's a tough thing to get over until you're shown something better. Okay, others?
I'm wondering if you're optimistic about this approach with Braver Angels, and I applaud what you're doing. I'm just wondering, there's been the polarization as you've described over time. Mm-hmm. Perhaps it's related to the effectiveness of the negative ads, because one negative ad can really motivate the electorate on the other side to come out, and the core strategists of each side are going to use what's most effective for getting their candidate into office. And that's so effective and so motivating that generation after generation, it becomes more and more polarized. And this is an attempt to stop that. And yet, if it's effective, I'm not optimistic that things are going to get better. I think, if anything, things are going to get more and more difficult with regard to one side playing to the baser elements of the other side.
You may be quite right, but I'm going to fight, okay? And I'm going to ask you to join in the fight for our democracy, our way of life, what we hold dear, okay? Did the people that went to the battlefield have any assurance that they were going to win the battle or the war? They didn't. But they went with the hope, and it's hope that's going to have to drive a number of people. And I admire 10,000 people who have hope around me. There's a lot of power right there. And they're going to push down a lot of walls. And it's well over 10,000. So the question is, we can only do what we can do. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. Yeah. Okay? Yes.
I really want to applaud your attitude and your challenge of starting with ourselves. But just for a moment, I'd like to see if we could accept an assumption that there are structural explanations that underlie this, that go beyond us as individuals or families or a culture or a society, specifically the structures of finance and the structures of the media, both of which...
say that again, the structures of?
The media.
Media.
And structures of finance. So in the political arena, unfettered amounts of money can go into any campaign by anybody, without attribution in actual fact, or with hidden attribution. Media's gone globalized. There are actually nefarious actors globally that want this to get worse, not better, and actively pursue it through available structures. One way of thinking about that is ethics, laws, and regulations almost always trail reality and societal change. Braver Angels working on the structures that underlie this?
You've just pointed out some real challenges. I mean, we're fighting against the big megaphone that's blaring out at our culture, and it's easier to listen to them than to think through the issues. I don't know how we're going to solve it. I relish some of the debates of almost 150 years ago that are rather delightful by comparison to the way we do things. They didn't tear people down, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. Again, we're trying to create different formats, and again, braver politic is one way we're trying to get to the, but you're right, it's a big wall. It's a big wall, but we've allowed the wall to happen. So the question is, when are we going to not tolerate the wall anymore? And I'm not talking about the other wall, you know. But yeah, you made some good points. Thank you. And then back here after. Okay. Yes.
So if you picked up the Post this morning, there's an article on election judges, you know, and how that, even that, you know, that pillar of democracy at the very local level is being, you know, infiltrated by folks on any side, you know, that want to, you know, tip the process in one direction.
They don't like what they saw, so therefore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So is Braver Angels involved at that level? Do they, or you know, I'm sort of curious at what level you see your organization being effective.
Not officially that I know of. However, I am aware that some of the people within Braver Angels are poll workers. They've signed up for that, and that's a good thing, because I think they're going to be fair and they're going to be looking out, if you will, for anything that doesn't meet their criteria of fairness. But in terms of, do we have a whole sector toward that? No, not that I'm aware of. That's almost too porous within the landscape to be able to address them individually. Yeah. Yeah, I think there was somebody back here, back in the.
I was wondering if you could just comment a little bit on the sort of risk of moral relativism. So I fully appreciate wanting to respect and appreciate different viewpoints, and I just wonder if there's a limit to that. Do we have to respect and appreciate a racist or misogynistic viewpoint, or are there some limits?
When I hear about, I probably won't answer your question satisfactorily, but let's make a stab. When I hear people claiming certain things that I know they're more that they know better, I'm thinking they really have to hold their nose a lot to get through this. You look at the Christian right, and they will put up with a lot of things, morally and ethically questionable in order to achieve what they think is the right thing to do. So we are all over the map in terms of what we're willing to do to win. And you're seeing it right now in spades with, I love it that they're putting all the ads right behind each other so that you can get through them. But you know, the one candidate looks like a dirty dog, and the next candidate is the one calling them a dirty dog, but he looks really good, or not, or they're another dirty. It seems like there's no level at which we won't compromise because we're threatened by the kind of barbecue we like, okay? We will protect those ideals that we have, and they will reshape what is morally correct in order to achieve the goal. But if you look at the goal, I use statistics a lot in my work, okay, over the years. I love data. Yeah, just like we all do, I know. And no one ever questioned my data or my view of statistics. And that's an easy shotgun to make. You can question that. But no one ever questioned it because of my character, okay? Because it's not worth it to me to give a slightly different view of life than to sell myself into that. And I just don't. But others find it a very convenient door to go through. And I just won't go through that, never have. No one's ever questioned what I've done. They always take it at face value and my interpretation of the data, the information that I create. And it's just because who's saying it in those cases. And there's many very more moral people than I am out there. But those that are willing to go down a different path, it's a very slippery one. I mean, in the Bible it says, you know, those leaders, and we always think of as the pastors and the so forth, that teach something other than truth are going to have a price to pay in terms of their, well, I think our leaders have a price to pay if they're embracing something that is false. It may look like a quick win in the early innings here, but in the late innings, they may be paying a terrible price for that.
I think I'm just going to follow up a little on that, though. When I follow you when you say you have to be better about listening to the other and really finding some common things. But do you have to be able to sit through and listen to somebody who is spouting really racist things or disinformation, things that are just not true? Like, how do you, on that one-to-one level that you talked about, how do you respond when somebody is speaking in those terms?
You know, I think you can, I haven't had that situation occur, but if you would, I think you can back yourself out of the conversation rather quickly. And it sounds like you're very passionate about that. I really appreciate you letting me know. In other words, that's not the conversation that's going to create any common ground, because they have defined they're the uncompromising folks that I talked about on either end of the spectrum, who are very solid in their ideals. I think you just walk away. I mean, sorry to say, but that's only 16% of our electorate. And so I think people in Colorado are a bit more moderate, not necessarily all the time, but more moderate than that. Yeah.
We probably have time for one more question. And then, Will, would you stay after if folks?
Sure.
Great, that'd be great.
Thanks. Really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm particularly interested in that Pew study that you cited. I think we all feel like polarization is increasing, but that's the first time I've actually seen a study to try to quantify that. And I'm curious if that was just like a one-off study or if that's done over time.
No, they apparently have been doing it since, I think, the mid-'80s. They do it every so many years.
Okay.
And so there's a progression. In fact, some of their data is simply the shift in some dimension of the electorate over time.
Yeah.
And so I haven't gone into that. That's deep in the weeds of the study, and I just haven't gone through that.
Yeah, and again, I'm curious about some sort of studies, and it sounds like that may be it, that actually quantifies in some sort of other than a non-media way of this rate of polarization that we're going through.
Yeah. It's called, the whole study, and you can just, is called political typology, the types of political typology. And so you can look it up, and like I said, you'll have a long afternoon of reading in store. You guys have been great, much better than the Broncos, really. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Will.